Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, brunch rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom! And we're back. The guys from Wicked Planet are back. I know it's been a while, but we got a really good show for you tonight. I'm joined by my Liberty Squawks co-host, Mr. Rick Smith. Rick, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Ron. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining in on this. I know this subject that we're going to talk about tonight you're super interested in.
Yeah, very excited. Been trying to follow this. You guys laid a very good groundwork of information in some previous episodes, so I can't wait to be caught up on what is transpiring now with the new events going on with this, so it'll be exciting to hear about it.
And with that, I want to welcome my old buddy, JJ Vance.
Ron, greetings, sir. Appreciate the invite.
From Operation GCD podcast. JJ, it's good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Yes, sir. I always enjoy convening with some fellow New Englanders such as myself. So great for the join you all today in this conversation, and I appreciate the invite. I'm a big fan of both your all's work there on Liberty Squawks, as I mentioned, and I'm sure you've known anyone else who listens to Operation GCD knows my affinity for America and liberty. So I like what you fellas do there.
Well, Rick and I have some pretty good plans for the show. You know, I mean, we're not going to get too much into conspiratorial stuff, but a lot of roads lead to conspiracies. So, we're going to work on Liberty Squawks going forward. We're going to put some time in with it, and hopefully it'll be something that the listeners will enjoy.
Nice. Yeah, so we haven't convened on this topic in quite some time, have we, Ron? Oh, and Rick, it's obviously excellent to meet you, sir. Big fan of y'all's work, and appreciate you being a big fan of Operation GCD as well.
Thank you, JJ.
Yeah, so what we're gonna hop into tonight is a subject that JJ, I, and Nick, our friend over at the Occult Rejects, have done 5 or 6 shows on, and we haven't talked about it recently. 8 shows.
8 shows, sir.
Dude, I can't keep track. It's always been a subject that's fascinated me because it's not what it appears to be. And that's something we're going to go over tonight. JJ's got some really cool information, and hopefully we can fill in a few empty spots here, some pieces of the puzzle that have been hidden on purpose, because it's not as simple as this Brian Koberger guy decided he was going to stalk all these people kill them all. It's not. It goes way deeper than that. And I mean, we've touched on a lot of that before. But what I want to get into, JJ, is the whole connection. Because we've hinted that there might have been drug trafficking involved. We've talked about the drug trafficking in the fraternities in these colleges, and this was a college town. Actually, 2 colleges close to each other, because where this transpired was right on the Washington and Idaho border. And also the connection to high finance and our friend Sam Bankman-Fried over there at FTX Exchange. JJ, I'm gonna kind of let you take the mic, and why don't you get us rolling on this?
You make some good statements. I like your style there, Ron. As always, this is an intriguing case. It's rooted in not any facts but fiction in regards to anything of the public. The conviction of the suspect and now guilty plea, convicted, not soon to be sentenced, Brian Kohberger, right, and the suspect in the case of this quadruple homicide that occurred on 11/13/2022 in Moscow, Idaho. Allegedly, 4 college students asleep in their beds. That was the first story. We're back to their sleep in their beds again now at the end. But as you know, in between, that narrative has changed various times, and objective evidence to support that claim to be completely erroneous and false. But we first convened, Ron, on this. I was just looking it up 2 years ago. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Almost 2 years ago to the day.
Wow.
So eight episodes later, this is mine and yours 9th time discussing this on Operation GCD. I've gone a lot of deeper on these parapolitical angles with the Sam Bankman-Fried stuff, the money laundering, the associations with the university. What I think, what's evolved over time, and as I analyze those parapolitical aspects associated with the environment, perhaps directly associated and related to the murders, is an ongoing enterprise of what I like to call hood rat shit. It's a real technical term of things that have been going on in this country for a long time under the guise of national security, be it drug trafficking, gun running, human trafficking, etc. Now, we saw these things kind of pop up to the public sphere in the late 80s, early 90s under the guise of Iran-Contra. I'm calling this Idaho-Contra because of the same activities and literally some of the same people, some of the same money launderers involved in Iran-Contra, like Leon Black, who's the head of he was the head of Drexel Burnham Lamb. He was a major figure in a firm called Drexel Burnham Lambert on Wall Street, and they got caught up in the BCCI portion of Iran-Contra scandal. He and his buddy were doing about $1.5 billion in what they call junk bonds. It was a Ponzi scheme. Anyhow, he went into business with the University of Idaho president Scott Green, who was interested in purchasing the University of Phoenix. So we literally have money launderers from Iran-Contra involved in these matters in Idaho and around this university. And Leon Black, for example, has already paid out $200 million to those Epstein victims that don't exist.
Yeah. We'll touch on that in the end. That still mind boggles me. Because, Sean, I was talking to anonymous Sean. I talk to Sean every day, but he was telling, and not to get off of Idaho, but he was telling me there's more to this. It's a part psyop. There's something else. We're gonna have to give it a day or two and try to figure it out. And he's texted me like 100 texts in the last day.
Nice.
of stuff that he's finding. But what's interesting, JJ, is how all of this is the same play over and over and over again. And in the beginning, when we first started doing our series, we were thinking that Kohberger wasn't guilty of this, right? And I still have my doubts. And I seriously doubt that he was able to pull this off by himself. I cannot believe it. It's just not possible. I won't say that I know what it takes to clean up a lot of blood, but it takes a lot to clean up a lot of blood and to do a really good job. That shit has to be done professionally, right? And all of these things that we talked about in all the previous episodes, now out of the blue, he decides he's going to plead guilty as long as they take the death sentence off the table. Do you think he's doing this because he was ordered, okay, you need to take the hit for this, or this is what's going to happen? I mean, is this cartel action? Is this cartel action? Is this government high-end government officials in cahoots with cartel people that's doing all this? Try to fill it in for us, because I know a long time ago we had talked about this one bank up there that's very suspect and tied into Sam Bankman-Fried, which is the FTX crypto scammer who's sitting in jail. Actually, wasn't he Diddy's roommate or something like that? He was in
yes, sir. He and Diddy were cellies, and they had the same attorneys, and Diddy made an emergency stop to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, just before he got arrested.
Really?
Yes, sir.
All right, so
documented. That's not my claim. It's documented.
So go over that again, JJ, because this whole Diddy thing, like we could do a whole show on the Diddy thing or multiple shows on that. There's no reason for him to get these minor charges and everything else dropped when you know for a fact it goes deeper. So there's probably even a Diddy connection to this whole thing.
I agree. I think it falls within that scope of the Idaho Contra, definition is what I was saying. And I'll get to that through the money laundering in a second, through Bankman-Fried and Diddy. If I may start with your statements on Koberger. Yeah, my position is remains the same. Koberger did not do it, demonstrably proven throughout the state's evidence, and we can get into why I think he took that guilty plea and the extenuating circumstances around these matters. After, that I think would be only reasonable to even presume based upon the identifiable known knowns of the money laundering stuff going on around there and whatnot. But as far as the Koberger evidence goes, the state never produced any evidence to convict Brian Koberger. In fact, they've lied, they've cheated, and they've basically doubled down on their previous lies despite arguing out their own lies in court on numerous occasions. For example, when Bill Thompson, the prosecuting attorney for Latol County, stood up the other day on the guilty plea hearing last Wednesday here, on July 2nd, and said, he read off. He said, he started off by saying, I got some new information and evidence, presented no new information and evidence. He proceeded to read what was essentially the probable cause affidavit for arrest of Brian Koberger from December 29th, 2022. Now, since December 29th, 2022, he has argued himself in court that PCA is irrelevant and erroneous. Right, because, and here's the notable reason why, because Brian Koberger's defense pressed the subject on these alleged statements of frozen shock phase, where the alleged witness to the event, who described Brian Koberger with bushy eyebrows, the surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, claimed that she was in a frozen shock phase and could not call 911 for 8 hours. That's in the probable cause statement for arrest and affidavits, quoted as her statement. They could prove that because the defense got their hands on her cell phone records, and both roommates were awake, texting, Snapchatting, Instagramming, checking Indeed.com. I thought that was for job applications, but apparently not. Calling folks, taking photographs. So that at that point in time, Bill Thompson, about 6 months ago, had to say, well, that's, the PCA is no longer relevant. It's no longer part of this case, and the court agreed. But then we watched him get up in court and read that PCA.
Explain PCA for the listeners, JJ.
So on December 29th, 2022, the lead detective, Brett Payne, which there's a lot of issues with that matter to unpack, but he, the rookie cop they selected as the lead detective in the state's most heinous crime, he signed an affidavit, didn't get it notarized, which I would argue is a major legal boo-boo here, if you will. I'm not an attorney, sir, but I'm also not the vice president as well. I just want to point out these are my assessments here based upon my knowledge of these understandings of these things. But you need to swear under oath that affidavit for it to be a lawful legal filing. You can't accept a declaration as what he's filed. But nonetheless, that is the affidavit for arrest that was filed. It's on record with the state court website. Anyone can go check it out right now, dated December 30th, 2022. And in that, they describe the probable cause, the reasons why they need to arrest Brian Koberger for a charge of burglary and 4 charges of first-degree murder. Right. And in that evidence, they describe a lot of details that his defense attorneys have been able to prove were false, including the frozen shock face statements of the roommates soliciting them to not call 911 for 8 hours. Yeah. These ideas that they were asleep. No one was asleep in that house. And it's demonstrated through their own cell phone activity, et cetera. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of that probable cause affidavit where they're describing the reasons why Brian Koberger did this, right? They describe his route of travel, right? And then his defense attorney would later prove all of that to be false. This route of travel they assert in this document, right? Claiming he went through these places. So they claim, for example, in that affidavit, the detective claims to have viewed videotape, surveillance tape from various locations, businesses, etc. Well, when asked to produce that stuff last May, he could not produce it.
So he said it existed, but he wasn't able to produce it.
Right.
So in the eyes of any court, then it doesn't exist, except this court.
Yes, sir. And in that same hearing, on these evidence last May from Koberger's defense counsel, Ann Taylor, she questioned the forensic detective on the case. He was the lead detective. The forensic detective, Mowry, as I call him, his name is Mowry, but I call him Mowry. He testified that in the probable cause affidavit, you see all these images of a map with his alleged route of travel of tracking his cell phone. He didn't save any of that information. That was all a map he made himself with Google Maps. So what we have here is the public evidence presented in these matters is videotape evidence that they couldn't produce later. The claiming they see his car on eyewitness testimony allegedly to seeing Koberger inside the home that was in frozen shock phase. Turns out she was on her cell phone for 8 hours, was never asleep. Her and the other roommate. And we also see this map that was made out of erroneous cell phone data, which was not tracking Brian Koberger, which was only detecting the towers his phone was going to. Those towers you can reach up to a 20-mile radius. So that's the public evidence we've been presented. Now, any evidence regarding this DNA and the alleged knife sheath, I will tell you right now, it's been publicly stated in the January 2025 public hearing that there was no chain of custody and there was no lab reports for the alleged DNA samples and the transfer to different labs and this weird transfer that they did from Idaho to this private lab of Othram in Texas to the FBI. And therein lies the problem here. The FBI has been pulling the strings in every aspect of this and from moment one and throughout this entire case, to include a secret grand jury that they convened in order to get evidence for Brian Koberger. The state then used that evidence. We haven't seen it. They allegedly, in theory, they used the evidence, right? We haven't seen it. Then to convict Koberger in a state court, and then they would argue in the state court, well, we can't provide that federal evidence from a federal grand jury. This is a state court. And these things are the matters of liberty and violations of due process that should concern everybody, that you can convict somebody on a PowerPoint. Now, we can get to the reason why he pled guilty later, but I think there's a lot to be said about those things because there's the evidence that was publicly presented, right? I can only imagine the bigger shit show behind the scenes.
Now, we talked.
Does that make sense?
Yes, we talked before. Just getting back to the knife sheath, and we pounded that because they're saying that this is where they got the touch DNA from it. Correct? And,
yes, sir. And would you believe, if I may interject,
JJ,
Ron,
we still haven't seen the knife sheath.
No, negative. And would you believe that DNA sample, when transferred from Othram to the FBI, somehow doubled in size?
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty standard, right? DNA samples usually doubled in size between labs, right? Yeah. With no chain of custody.
So since we're on the knife sheath, right? Because I've been trying to listen to some alternative viewpoints with this, right? So I listened to Ashley Banfield. She has a podcast called Drop Dead Serious. I know you're a big fan of her. And she likes to, one of her big points to bring up is that Koberger allegedly bought or at least searched on Amazon for a knife sheath, right? And the theory behind that is that he was trying to replace the one that he had allegedly lost at the crime scene. Can you expand on that at all, of that alleged search that he had made for another knife sheath?
Yeah. So what they were doing there, and it should have been a big clue to Ashley Banfield if she removed her head from her rectum. For example, 2 weeks ago, she was on her show telling everybody that all these witnesses that were being subpoenaed out of Pennsylvania were for the prosecution when they were demonstrably for the defense, and they said so on the motions. So she either can't read or she's being intentionally dumb. I would argue a little bit of both, but they're not mutually exclusive, especially in her case. But that's the games they're playing here with this media. So a lot of the ideas folks have in this case were never in the court, right? So there's a lot of this stalking stuff. Bill Thompson himself got up in front of the court last year and hollered, the prosecuting attorney from Lake County. We've never said he was stalking. He was never stalking, et cetera. So these are the media campaigns that are presented when he's getting up in court and saying otherwise, right? So that is part of the magic show. But in regards to this quote unquote click activity that occurred after the murders, right? We don't know that Brian Koberger purchased a knife sheath, a K-bar and a K-bar knife sheath and sharpener in the first place, right? We know somebody from a family account at the Koberger home of his parents, where he lived until June of 2022. This was purchased in March. He also apparently purchased a gift card. So what it seems, if you were to add those together, the gift card was for his father. And his father, purchased these items or something in that capacity, right? Because they're obviously outdoors folks. They live in the mountains of the Poconos. I've been up there. It's, it's Appalachia. You know what I mean? So, nonetheless, the click activity is how the state wants to sell it. So they claim he bought this in March. They won't say that it had a USMC logo on it, right? I suspect it didn't. I could find no record of a K-bar knife being sold on Amazon with a USMC logo, right? So you can purchase it other places, just wasn't available through any stores outlets there, at least at the time when I looked, right? So nonetheless, they want to sell it as click activity, and the state was bringing in an expert witness to testify. Well, that wasn't the media was reporting it was Koberger's family members that were going to testify in that capacity. That's not true. They were never subpoenaed, right? The click activity is obviously be some sort of witness, expert witness saying that, oh, he clicked on these things. Well, he clicked on those things after November 20th, 2022, first and foremost, right? And on November 16th, 2022, the media and law enforcement were already reporting about a K-bar knife.
Okay, JJ, let's back up. They did recover a K-bar knife at the scene. Is that correct?
To date, that is not allegedly, yes, sir. That is the official narrative. To date, that has not been produced publicly outside of a picture of a stock image of a K-bar knife in sheath. So as the story goes, and we still to date do not know the dynamic of response from law enforcement to that home that morning. For example, we have 4 different reports of 4 different groups of officers responding there first. The call allegedly takes place at 11:58. It actually took place at 11:56 if you look at the actual record. So once again, the narratives that get spun and confusion on this matter, I think, is intentional. But the police arrive, literally, if you listen to the 911 call, they're there within seconds. But they arrive 2 minutes later, I believe, on the official record, 3 minutes later. And so that 911 call, well, let's just stop there. That 911 call is one of the many problems I have with all these things. People consider that as fact, and it was leaked. It's not an official record.
And who allegedly made the 911 call?
So allegedly, as we know, it was a joint effort. And from day one, they said it was numerous folks and whatnot. They said it was made from a roommate's cell phone, one of the surviving roommates. So we hear both of the surviving roommates on there and a number of their friends. On the leaked copy and transcript, again, I don't put any validity to that. I have a lot of problems with that audio. It was leaked by Whitman County 911. They were acting like they were a separate party. And as you and I have discussed in our previous discussions, Ron, all of these law enforcement agencies operate in one joint 911 call center, one joint SWAT operations, and one joint drug task force. So the idea that the 911 center is like, oh, we're not part of the investigation, we're not part of the gag order, we're just going to go ahead and release this is preposterous.
Okay. Why I asked about the K-bar knife, and I know that we've talked about this before, they kept pounding it that it was a K-bar knife that did the slicing, right? Now, are they saying now that this K-bar knife that they allegedly recovered was a USMC labeled or coded K-bar knife?
That is their report, is that is the USMC logo embroidered on the leather sheath that was left there. They've never recovered a knife, and their first officers on scene didn't see a sheath.
Well, we haven't seen the sheath. We've been talking about the sheath. We haven't seen the sheath. And the sheath that we question if it actually exists is the same sheath that they got their touch DNA off of. And why I asked if it was branded a USMC K-bar knife, you said earlier in the show that you cannot purchase a USMC logoed K-bar knife on Amazon.
Not when I looked, no, sir.
So
I tried to find any historical records of such, and I couldn't find that either.
Right. So their click activity report, even prior to that, when they first said initially that he had purchased this K-bar on Amazon, possibly. Well, if the K-bar knife that they have is a USMC, United States Marine Corps labeled knife, engraved in it, then that doesn't wash.
Burning myself.
That doesn't wash. You know what I mean?
I agree. That's what I'm saying. They've been playing all these dubious games and making very ambiguous statements. No one's ever confirmed that K-bar knife that was purchased on the Koberger's family Amazon account, which I'm fine with, right? No one's ever confirmed whether or not that had that logo on there. And we know the games they've played around all these warrants, the actual games they play around the DNA of even accessing the Koberger's parents' trash can on private property without a warrant.
Yeah,
and some folks say that you can do that because the trash was in the driveway, not in a private gated community. That all the roads in a private gated community are private property by law.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I told you I had a friend that was in the trash business that actually beat a case under that basic law. And as a matter of fact, they turned it into a law and they named it after him. It's called the Naughton Law in New Hampshire.
I do remember that. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So what we get for the reports on the knife sheath is the first responding officers don't see it, and then the corresponding officers the lead detective is being told by another officer who finds it later. They just says finds it later, right? So we don't know when it was found. As we've discussed in the past, there's no chain of custody on this knife sheath. And their own filings, reports, and affidavits have been released publicly. It should say Officer Nunez, who was the first guy on scene, saw the knife sheath between the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan's bodies, or underneath Madison Mogan, because there's differing accounts of where the exact location of this knife sheath was. And I'll get into the actual reports. There's actually other blood found on that knife sheath that Koberger was excluded from the sample of, but they never tested to find out who was the owner of that blood.
Yeah, there was blood samples from 4 other people, or there was some type of DNA samples from 4 other people at the scene that didn't fit anybody that was there, correct?
Yes, sir. There was DNA under the nails of Madison Mogan as if she was fighting her attacker. There was blood on that knife sheath that was allegedly next to her body that was not Brian Koberger's. There was blood on a hand railing that was not Brian Koberger's. There was blood on a glove that was not Brian Koberger's. And would you believe they didn't fingerprint anything in this damn place?
And they can't now, right? Because conveniently, there's no more house.
So, and that was one of the biggest parts I had with the problems I had as I look up for this other DNA report here, fellas. But this crime scene there was trampled on within 24 hours. Law enforcement was in and out of there. We know students were in and out of there before law enforcement got there. Law enforcement demonstrably on photographs and camera do not have gloves or boots on. There's no one using a crime scene log to track entry and exit of the facility. These are all very important factors in the continuity of evidence.
All right, so you take all these factors into play, and this is why on our previous episodes on this subject, we had a hard time thinking that Koberger did this.
Yeah, if you remember on December 7th, 2022, Ron, when they announced to the world they were looking for a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. And again, there's a lot of tomfoolery behind that story, but because, again, Koberger draws to 2015, and they allegedly, or later would allege they already knew about Koberger at this date. But they announced to the world, and then moments later, Chief Fry, Moscow Police Department Chief Fry, is driving a U-Haul over there to empty out the crime scene. When they just told the world, we don't have a fucking clue. We need everyone's help. Yep. And while everyone's searching for white Hyundai Elantras from here to Mumbai, India, because this is a worldwide attention, he's it's a distraction. He's emptying the house with the U-Haul himself and his whole team.
Well, then we also talked about, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we also had talked about how many white Hyundai Elantras were actually registered in that geographical area, and it was it was hundreds of them. Yeah, it's crazy.
Can we go back to the emptying of that house? Did they ever give a reason as to why they went over there and did that and filled that U-Haul the way they did?
Not a legitimate reason. They just said they needed to get the items to the victims the victims' items back to their families. They also didn't secure the vehicles of these victims, and I would argue they allegedly processed them for evidence. I would argue maybe because they didn't. Everything they did in this thing is not an investigation. So we're led to believe that if you read their actual reports later, that they interviewed 4 different subjects in Moscow in the immediate aftermath to the crimes. And they got those folks to give up DNA evidence. One of the 3 of the 4 volunteered it. They were all excluded as a result of them doing that. The 4th one allegedly said no. So they followed this fellow around town. It was a male, they said. Followed this unidentified male. They don't give the name, obviously, around town until he threw out a cigarette butt. And then they grabbed the cigarette butt and they excluded him from the DNA from the cigarette butt. Mind you, this is November 19th that's occurring. Right, November 20th, right? So Brian Koberger never left Pullman, Washington. He continued on to teach his midterm exams as a TA over at Washington State University, confirmed as such by the university all the way up to December 14th. So why they would have to chase the man across the United States to Pennsylvania to his parents' home is It's part of the magic show. They had to make it look like he was running away, but they could have asked that man for his DNA. They could have gone to his Washington State University campus apartment. They could have gone to his office. That wouldn't have required any warrant.
Because according to them, he was a suspect right off the bat, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, so they waited all that time to chase him down when he was headed back to his parents for the holidays.
And they've conflicted on that because in their affidavits, they assert that they claim he was a suspect at that time based upon some Washington State University officers identifying his 2015 White Hyundai Elantra on or about November 28th. That, again, begs the question, why, if that's occurring on November 28th in their arresting affidavit, right, that's what it states. The detective contradicts himself later under oath in a testimony in a hearing, but it begs the question, if that's true on November 28th, well, why would they be doing any of these things like announcing to the world looking for the wrong years 9 days later, right? So when Brett Payne testifies under oath about that affidavit in May of 2024, he testifies that he did not know anything about Brian Koberger's name, didn't know anything about those earlier identifications and reports, 3 of them, between November 28th and December 19th. He says the first time he hears Brian Koberger's name, the FBI calls, this is under oath, the FBI calls him and just says, Brian Koberger is your suspect. And they don't tell him anything about DNA. They don't tell him anything about anything. They just say Brian Koberger is your suspect. And on December 20th is when the FBI started tracking Brian Koberger at his parents' house in Pennsylvania, and that's documented. I argue it was probably done before that, but that's the dates they're willing to admit to right now.
So let's go forward. I mean, we've gone over the evidence, the probable cause, the whole thing with the car, the cell phone information from the people inside the house. Again, remind the listeners how long it took for these people that were in the house to contact the police to explain any of this, anything that was happening.
Oh, did I cut out? Am I back?
Yeah, you're good.
You're back.
Yeah.
I cut out there for a second. We just want to know, we don't know all the details on the transcript. So everything in this case has been sealed. And I don't think it's going to change. I don't think the gag order is going to continue. I agree with Kelly Gonzalez, the victim's father, Steve Gonzalez, in his interview with Ashley Banfield, as you mentioned before, Rick. He says gag orders are for matters of national security. So I agree with his statement there because we don't know a lot of details still to this day. We have some known knowns, if you will. I like to sarcastically quote Donald Rumsfeld. We have some known knowns. We know that these surviving roommates were awake. We're calling, texting, Snapchat, and taking photos, calling their folks. Brian Koberger's guilty because he calls his folks on a Sunday morning, and sends them a selfie, right? Which they altered that selfie like they did Orenthal, James Simpson. The parallels are so similar, but he's anything Brian Koberger does or does not do is guilt. Anything the surviving roommates did, they can't be wrong. But when you were saying there's so many parallels from the Orenthal James Simpson murder case because he didn't do it versus this. So Nicole Brown Simpson had DNA under her fingernails that was not OJ's. Mm-hmm. She had blood on her person around her neck that was not OJ's because she got attacked from behind and was clearly trying to fight her attacker before they slit her, damn near chopped her head off like what allegedly happened to one of the victims in this case.
Right.
We have that same parallel. Madison Mogan, fingernails, not Koberger DNA, blood on the sheath, on the knife sheath in her person, I believe it is, not Koberger DNA.
Yeah, you did a really good suspect. JJ, I just want to plug your series that you did, or the episode you did on OJ, where you were convincing, I'm sorry, I can't recall her name, but you had Cosmic Peach on, and she had the idea that going into it with an open mind, though, that OJ had done it, but you were just so good at laying out the facts and the scenarios and just presenting it in such a clear and concise way where you were able to change her mind, at the end of it. And it was just, it was such an awesome intellectual exercise to listen to and I have to give her kudos for being that intellectually honest to be willing to change her mind. But yeah, when you just mentioned all those facts, it brought me back to that episode, and you're exactly right with the parallels between these two, because it almost seems like this is the MO when it comes to these cover-up stories, right? I mean, I kind of see similar fact patterns in a way with what's going on, or just what happened in Massachusetts with the Karen Reed trial. I mean, there is massive law enforcement cover up in that trial, and there was only so much that was able to be let in because the judge was is in the same way with the Koberger trial. Like, you could tell that they are 100% in for the state, whatever that narrative is going to be. That's the only narrative that they're going to allow. And it took some extremely crafty lawyers to be able to get her a not guilty verdict through that trial, because the original trial she went through was hung. And so there's just so many corrupt cases going on, at the same time throughout this country. And it's just wild to me that, we're able to view it in real time. We're able to also review it in real time, and we can have this information at our fingertips and be able to present it in a format like this, where we can literally change people's minds just by having them listen to, a conversation. I think that's wonderful. What will transpire from it, though? Like, can we change the thought process of America to understand that essentially the whole judicial system is corrupt? I don't know, but at least we can have the conversation to get people thinking about it.
And that's where I'm at with it, sir. Yes, sir. I agree, because my whole concept is you can't fix a problem unless you identify it. Right. So we're identifying this problem with these ongoing enterprises of criminality and abuses of our justice system by folks who claim to be an authority, right? Claim to be an authority. So relative also to these matters with the Orenthal James Simpson murder case, we see the same thing, more parallel. So we see, back to this larger network of parapolitical activity, we see Detective LAPD, quote unquote, retired felon Nazi detective Mark Furman. Not my claims. That was an internal affairs investigation report, which ultimately ended his career. And that whole perjury thing, well, I agree, he perjured himself in the trial. They kind of, bastardized that and fixed that a little bit for him, so you want to cover up. But nonetheless, because they use like some audio footage or recordings from him and a film director from 10 years prior to prove he was a racist in the court. And that was part of the show. That was part of the show in that trial. It was a show trial in many respects. And we see a lot of these same kind of, we got Marcia Clark, the high-ranking Scientologist, as the prosecuting attorney. Orenthal James Simpson is described as having a dream team. I would describe it more as a nightmare team, right? Because Furman kind of blew it up for both sides, but OJ's defense attorneys didn't do him a lot of great service. For example, OJ's defense attorneys never asked Philip Van Adder, did he plant evidence? They asked Mark Furman that, and then the jury was removed from the proceedings before Furman could be asked or answer that, and the jury never learned that he perjured himself in that question, right? He never learned that. But they never did the same thing to Philip Van Adder, and Philip Van Adder also planted evidence in that case. He was the lead detective. Mark Furman was the first responding detective. So Philip Van Adder literally carried around, first of all, when Orenthal James Simpson gives up his blood to Philip Van Adder, without a warrant voluntarily, literally the day of the murders, later that day when he flew back from Chicago, when he voluntarily went to the police station, Philip Van Adder kept that in his pocket. And then we later learned he went and got Nicole Brown Simpson's blood and Ron Goldman's. And then we later learned that he had those and walked around the crime scene for about 3 days before ever putting them into evidence. So why he was never asked in trial of those details is part of that show I'm talking about. But we see these same things, and part of that deal with that show you're describing. I appreciate the kind words there, Rick. It was actually Julia's suggestion. She wanted to have it. I was like, let's. I'm happy to do that. Let's go. But one of the books I covered was Blood Oath by Stephen Worth. Wrote it in 1996. And he had an informant. And this is another book I covered was by Stephen Singular. He wrote it was a Legacy of Deception was Stephen Singular's book. It was about Mark Furman. So they had two different informants. Stephen Singular's came from the LA prosecutor's office, talking about planting evidence and Mark Furman being a Nazi, because they were doing an internal affairs investigation at the time already on him. And a 42-page, I believe it was, describing how of an ardent Nazi he was. Right, that got published, I think, 2 days after he testified in the trial. By the way, again, this is part of the games being played. But Stephen Singular has LA prosecutor's office giving him all these details about a white nationalist domestic terror campaign that started off with the murder of a white woman to be blamed on a prominent black man to start racial chaos. There we go, with the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. That was supposedly the starting event. The ending event in that campaign was Oklahoma City. We have a corresponding person from within that network as a a person contacting that Stephen Worthfell in Blood Oath. So he writes about that same domestic campaign, and both parties from corresponding sources, one within the law enforcement community, the other one within the network of these white nationalists, both describe how Mark Furman was connected to that compound in Hayden Lake and how they planned out numerous domestic terror campaigns. So much like what we just saw pop off with those firefighters the other day. So, and when I see Furman in this situation, I see details like that, I have to ask a lot of questions.
Well, okay, so we know all this craziness that happened. Now we know it, that happened during the OJ and Nicole Brown Simpson murder, right?
Right. We have the ability, to go look back.
Nobody thought of that stuff back then. Either OJ did it, if the glove don't fit, you must have quit, et cetera, et cetera. It was all theater. It was TV ratings were through the roof. I couldn't tell you anybody that I know that wasn't watching that. People were taking days off of work to watch that trial, right?
I can still tell you precisely what I was doing during the Bronco chase and during the verdict.
Go for it.
Oh, you want? Okay, I was a young man of 14. I was almost 14 when during the Bronco chase, June of '94. So I was a couple weeks shy of 14. But I was standing in the mall, local mall, and I'm like, what's going on? Back then, right? They had the big windows of the electronic stores in the mall all had TVs in them. So every TV on the whole window, I'm watching this Bronco chase. So, and then September of '95, when the verdict was read, I was in my sophomore year of Spanish class, and my Spanish teacher insisted on translating the entire affair into Spanish and having us all watch it. So
nice. Hey, are you guys, we're talking about, we know that we have a corrupt legal system. We've seen it with all the persecution and prosecutions of Donald Trump, all the lawfare that was used against him. We're still seeing it now when you got these judges that are always giving injunctions against his executive orders. The Supreme Court came back and said, basically, to paraphrase, you can't do that. So stop doing that, right? So now, did you hear the latest? Sean was actually telling me about this, but I saw something else about it. Rick, I don't know if you're familiar with this. There was a case in New Hampshire where a gentleman was going to law school, and because of his political views, and he scored very high on the bar exam, he passed the bar exam. They are denying him a law license in New Hampshire, and they have figured out it's based on his political affiliations and his thoughts and what he did for a living before. Now, I just discovered...
Well, if I may, Ron, if any state's going to do that, it would be Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. I mean, the political atmosphere up in those states, as I'm sure you're obviously well aware of, it's gotten very divisive.
Right,
absolutely.
But New Hampshire is not as bad as Maine and Vermont. But Maine is
not as sandwiched in between the madness.
Maine,
it really is.
But New Hampshire. Okay, so why New Hampshire is one of the richest states? One of the richest states in New England. New Hampshire is.
Sure.
Now,
all that Boston money, right?
Well, it's all the criminal money that's here. It's all these big people, all these corporations, all these defense contractors that are stationed in New Hampshire for whatever reason. There's so much money in this state, it would make your freaking head spin.
Yeah.
Right?
L3's down there. They got some big facilities and stuff like that. I know that.
Going right up the government ladder. And now, of course, our ex-governor, Jeanne Shaheen, her husband's law firm, there's a lot of talk about that. Again, not going to make any accusations or anything like that, but that there was a connection between Jeanne Shaheen's husband's law firm and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Oh, well, I wouldn't be surprised. That's why she was hiding out there. Well, look what the politics in Vermont have done. Bernie Sanders and his wife have ruined Burlington. I remember a point in time that was a beautiful city, and it's a post-apocalyptic nightmare now.
Well, somebody was just reporting how Burlington, Vermont, is basically a communist haven. Is what it is now. Yeah, it's what it is
stabbings are up 300% in 2 years. Stabbings up 300%. I watched two Haitian fellas butcher a chicken doing some sort of voodoo ceremony in the hallway of a hotel there a couple years back.
Yeah,
True story.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. So
they have an influx. If I may, they put like 40% increase in population of all these undocumented illegal immigrants into that town.
Vermont's all about that. Vermont. My sister lives there. I hear what's going on there. You know
Got
what I
real
mean?
stabby, Ron. Got real stabby in the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
Is there a correlation between that increase in population and the 300% increase in stabbings? Just asking
I would say
questions.
there's a direct correlation. Yeah, direct correlation. It's that and the lack of law enforcement. So it's if they're not going to enforce the small laws, then of course this is not a new concept of law enforcement. If you don't, whatever they have some fancy name for it. I'm sure they taught it to me at some time in college. Broken glass theory or whatever. You gotta enforce the small laws to expect to be able to enforce the law. The bigger laws will kind of curtail themselves.
Yeah, I've heard of that term. But I'm under the understanding that Trump is going to come down on the Bar Association because the Bar Association,
they're a bunch of crooks.
Big time. That's what I'm finding out. You know what? And I just thought they were like it was a government licensing that you had to go through to prove that you were competent enough to be an attorney. I thought that's what the Bar Association was.
Yeah, they're a bunch of communist pricks, dude.
And this is why they're turning out all these leftist, socialist-leaning lawyers that become judges. And this is why all across the country, George Soros' money's behind this. They've proven it. He has installed what they call Soros prosecutors, right? So do we have that in this Idaho case? Or what do we know about these prosecutors in the Idaho case? Because I have a feeling that this was something that went down, something went sideways. It's part of a government / cartel / whatever deep state operation that's going on up in Idaho and in Washington that got out of hand.
Yep.
And that Brian Koberger is the fall guy, the patsy.
I would agree with that. We've discussed before that he likely got an internship as part of his college PhD program. I've got more documents since then that seems to indicate he did get that internship starting in September of 2022. So he was well known to all the authorities in this case that have been investigating it, if that was the case. So he was the PhD intern over at the not the university, but Pullman PD, right? Pullman PD. The town PD over there in Washington State University's at, because Moscow PD does the university police work on University of Idaho campus, but 7 miles away, Pullman has their own force and Washington State has their own force, and they share sheaths back and forth, so it's basically all the same thing. But nonetheless, he's well known. So if can I share with you a clip that I'm talking about from that Stephen Worth guy's book, because I think it would really set the proper stage for the environment that I'm trying to describe. Now, this was a book in 1996. Describing a white nationalist campaign of domestic terror launched out of the Hayden Lake compound of the Aryan Nations, which was burnt down in 2001. But we've seen numerous censuses in the area preceding last week. Numerous censuses where other white nationalists that were associated with that compound that just, moved. They burnt down the compound. The government did. So the folks just moved down the street. You know what I mean? So we've seen numerous censuses pop off in that region. And this guy really paints a good picture, I think, of what we're looking at there. And from my picture, my perspective now following events last week, this seems to make the most sense to me. If I may share this with you, I just got to find it real fast here. So he's describing how the not only is this campaign is meant to cause domestic terror, it's also designed to cause mistrust in government because these folks hate the U.S. government. So, and speaking of folks hate the U.S. government, commies hate the U.S. government like the Bar Association. There's a lot of OG pioneering Mormon families all around this Idaho situation. When I say they may hate America, they moved to America. Their ancestors did, and they got on wagon trains in the 1850s and went out west where they are today. And for some reason, are all congregating around this incident from numerous. I have eight different OG Mormon folks that are involved in this, descendants, right, from OG pioneering families, major people from the Attorney General to the surviving victim Dylan Mortensen. She's got an interesting heritage, and to the governor. And to the University of Idaho president. So when these folks' ancestors got on pioneering wagon trains in 1850, they weren't coming to America from Denmark and England. They were going to the nation of Deseret. America came in 1894 in their lives. So I would argue perhaps these folks are anti-liberty as well, and they fall within this globalist or whatever you want to call the other. I just call it anti-liberty because they're not pro-America. And I would argue that some of these people involved in this may be doing things in which to destroy and cause folks to not trust their own government, right? And I'm not saying the government doesn't do nasty shit. I'm just saying there are factions in there that we know this is their plan, is to cause domestic terror. And I would argue a lot of this is really just run by the government anyway, this domestic terror stuff. But that's a bit of a larger tale. I just want to argue the environment I think we're looking at is an author wrote about that environment in 1996, dealing with the same Hayden Lake compound as Mark Furman was associated with back then. So these are the same folks that went on a multiple, every 10 years or so, they do anniversary domestic terror campaigns, robbing banks and murdering folks. From Malin Berg in 1984 to Nicole Brown Simpson in 1994 to the OKC stuff. This all connects back to Northern Idaho. And this dude, this author 96 really nailed it. And I got to find this clip. So I apologize for my long-winded statement there, sir.
Oh, you're good, JJ. That Idaho has always been associated with white supremacists, anti-government people. And you notice how this story about these first responders that got shot in Idaho, how quiet that's gone? There's absolutely nothing about it. Because, no, here's your shooter.
That's what I'm saying, Ron. That's what I'm saying. You're right. You're spot on.
Yeah, here's your shooter. This is the person. No fucking way. No way.
Yeah, so I've listened to some of that audio stuff with the first responders. There's more than one shooter there. And they just find this guy just leaning up against a tree. No one really knows. They say it was a self-inflicted shot, allegedly. So, and his father's a Nazi Satanist. And these aren't my claims. These are the claims I have documented through his own photographs. 1488 tattooed across his knuckles. Outlaw biker dude. Thinks he's a werewolf. Takes pictures with the Church of Satan Bible, because that's one of the aspects that people don't really understand about some of these satanic cults, is they have these vampire and werewolf offshoots where they're like LARPing as these vampires, or werewolves. And this dude's literally riding around his Harley dressed as a werewolf, and he calls himself Wolf Voorhees. That's the shooter's father.
And what about Travis Decker? They kept talking about him. They kept trying to say that he was the shooter. And that was what was coming out heavy duty in the beginning, that he was the suspect. Now, all of a sudden, Travis Decker is not even in this picture. Now, he did recently, didn't he kill all his children, Travis Decker?
Yeah, so you bring up an interesting component. I have looked into some of that. So Travis Decker, about an hour west of Pullman, Washington, Moscow, Idaho, there, allegedly murdered his 3 kids about a month ago, and has been on the manhunt. Now, U.S. Marshals had spotted him in northern Idaho, apparently, allegedly. Eyewitness accounts who then alerted the marshals. So that's what I'm saying. So I just found this clip. Let me share this with you so we can. You want me to email it to you? What's the best way to do this? Ron, I'm new. I don't know what to do.
Well, I don't want to open up any windows because I'm afraid that my computer's going to freeze up. You hold on 1 second.
Yeah, okay. I just sent you a request, looks like.
Yeah, I got it. All right, so you can go ahead and share it.
Yeah, so if we're going to include that Decker guy in the situation, I don't know his exact white nationalist business or whatnot, but for example, Steve Gonzalez's brother, right? Kelly Gonzalez's paternal uncle, the victim there, he was a devout Nazi. He used to go out and give public speeches in Nazi uniforms. I got pictures. He's in prison today for murder. So, and they live, the Gonzalez family and 2 other victims live within a 5-mile radius of the former Hayden Lake compound. They all seem to have some drug and or Nazi connections. So I would argue, what are we looking at with some of these things? You understand the victimology of the matters, but if you're bringing in that Travis Decker guy, yeah, it's very possible we're looking at one of these larger campaigns of the same domestic terror campaigns launched out of there. Now, again, I would argue these things are government generated, like all these operations are. And they go back to folks like Bill Colby, right? Bill Colby, former CIA director. Yep. Phoenix Program, Operation Gladio, Air America drug trafficking, all brought to us by Bill Colby. But nonetheless, and all of those things go back over the years, documented in FBI reports go back to that Hayden Lake compound, Ruby Ridge, Waco, OKC, the Nicole Brown Simpson stuff, Alec Byrd and The Order, all go back to that compound. Hollywood just made a film about that, The Order. So these are stories that are still being retold in Hollywood today, but it is interesting, I think, to consider these aspects when we're trying to understand this environment. Again, when we see that numerous of the victims seem to have connections with this ideology in these groups, right?
I'm looking up to see what Decker's affiliation was. I thought it was Aryan Nation, but I could be wrong.
I've read some things on that. I just don't have the same confirmation as I do the shooter's father with the photographs and everything else. I'm happy to share those photographs so I can figure out how to share this video first. Oh, here we go. I got it. We're good. We're good. Can y'all see that?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. This is a quick 20-second clip to kind of what I was describing there from the author, Stephen Worth, Blood Oath, 1996.
Is the sound turned up, JJ?
Let me see. I'm at 100%. Can you not hear it on your end?
Yeah, we're not getting any sound.
Oh, no. Let's see here. Let's see. Share screen. Yep. Share sound.
Yeah, you got to share sound.
How do you know? Is there a button here for that? Oh, here we go. Share computer sound. Got it. Good to go. Thank you, sir. Let's start that over. Hi, I'm new. I don't know what to do. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for sticking with me.
This book is about a white supremacist plot to murder Nicole Brown Simpson, to frame O.J. Simpson for the murder, and in turn to use this event to divide the races in the United States, to discredit and alter the judicial system, and to discredit law enforcement, the LAPD in particular, and also to polarize law enforcement officers and to recruit them into the white supremacist camp.
So that was kind of the mix of it. And again, that was launched out of that Hayden Lake compound that Furman was identified by Internal Affairs and LAPD to be associated with before that time, right? And the way both those authors describe it is this network basically operates as is described there from that book, Blood Oath, that they have some bad actors on the inside to try to discredit the entire system.
Does crack cocaine make you act any differently? No. Is it safer than alcohol? Probably. People think of crack as being dirty. It's the exact opposite.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Well, the only difference between crack cocaine and cocaine is sodium bicarbonate and water and heat, literally.
That's it?
That's it.
And those things are pretty much free if you go to like a science store.
This is free. You can go to your neighborhood convenience store and just get. Anyway, I don't want to tell people how to make crack cocaine, but it literally is a mayonnaise jar, cocaine, and baking soda.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
When you make crack, what you're doing is you're burning off all the impurities so that it binds with the sodium bicarbonate, which makes it smokable. That's all. All of these actors and, people in the past that talked about they had a problem with cocaine and freebasing. They were smoking crack.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Anyway, my point about it, your point about it, which I think is true, is that there's a thing about crack.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Well, that's interesting because do you think, what is your theory on, because we got to, I'm trying to figure out the possible motives, the actual motives of these murders.
Yeah.
Apart from Brian Koberger being the patsy or the accused.
So I think I can break that down for you. I can break that down for you for sure. So it seems, based upon a large volume of evidence, I've discussed on my show, you and I have discussed on our joint efforts as well, Ron, in the past with Occult Rejects there as well, the large-scale drug trafficking problems that have been perpetrating on these campuses for numerous decades now through the Greek culture. And I'm not talking about small-scale stuff. This is all large-scale stuff. In fact, one specific Mexican cartel leader has been busted twice in Pullman, Washington, dealing large-scale amounts of cocaine. He keeps getting deported, and he keeps coming back because that's where the money is.
Right.
That's where the money is. So then you have the Aryan Nation side. So the U.S. attorney that got fired, there's so many dynamics that are in play from a Parapolitical perspective, but I think with the drug trafficking stuff, just if I make a quick side tangent, is very much exhibited by the fact that we see the U.S. attorney for Idaho, after getting fired by Trump, he's like, no, I resigned. He got fired. He takes over the case as a lead prosecutor. So that man was prosecuting both Aryan Nation and Mexican drug cartels, specifically the Sinaloa cartel. And I would argue he was doing that in order for the federal folks to control the drug environment like they did in Iran-Contra. Right?
And Gladio.
Well, yes, sir. And that is, these are the ongoing enterprises we see of a mixture of Bill Colby's projects, the Operation Gladio, the Air America, and Phoenix program. These are all brought to us by Bill Colby. So we still see these ongoing enterprises with people from Colby. So when I say we have all of these Nazi connections and all these domestic terror campaigns to that compound, we have a lot of Colby's troops connected directly to that compound. Folks like Bo Gritz, Special Forces, Green Beret, Bo Gritz. Yep. So he's the guy that settles Ruby Ridge. Randy Weaver from Ruby Ridge, connected to that same compound, also a Fort Bragg soldier. They claim he wasn't Special Forces, but he's documented getting explosives training, so I suspect he was, or at least was associated with that community at Fort Bragg with this Bill Colby squad of the Military Assistance Command that brought to us all these tyrannical programs brought home from overseas. But we see Bo Gritz, we see Randy Weaver, we see the guy, Bill Colby when we're getting into this money laundering, Bill Colby was sitting on a bank in 1980 that went under in Australia, the largest bank collapse in Australia at the time, Nugan Hand Bank. The co-founder and co-president of that bank, John Michael Hand, walks, no charges. The other guy, the Australian banker that he was a partner with, allegedly commits suicide. John Michael Hand walks, disappears into Idaho, and lived under an assumed name in Idaho Falls, till an Australian reporter found him in 2015. So Idaho's kind of got a history of that in that regard. And then you look to see what happens next. Then the next bank in these kind of hood rat shit operations of Bill Colby's crew, I like to call them Bill Colby's queers, not for a sexual commentary on their proclivities, but because queer in a, actual definition of the actual word, strange and odd, because these strange and odd elements that plague our society, these Nazi elements, the Idaho, the bombings, the these murders, et cetera, the drug trafficking, the other things that are associated with these hood rat shit activities. But it is these strange and odd elements of our society that we can't seem to explain, and they continue to plague us, and we see these repeating patterns. So the next bank is BCCI, the Bank of Commerce and Credit International. After Nugan Hand Bank folds, they move their operations there. That's where Leon Black, that fellow we talked about earlier, he gets involved with money laundering. Scott Green's buddy, the president of the University of Idaho. So before Scott Green was president of the University of Idaho, before he made deals with Leon Black, he ran the largest law firm in the world, corporate law firm. He was the chief operating officer and chief financial officer. He's a banker. It's not an attorney. They have offices in London and New York. These folks were heavy in crypto regulation. They were representing firms like Binance and FTX in trying to accomplish their goals in crypto regulation and banking. And we see him leave in circa 2018 and take the job at University of Idaho, where he's from, Moscow, Idaho. In fact, he grew up in the murder home at one point in time in his childhood, where his parents owned. Graduate of University of Idaho, fraternity grad, so on and so forth. So he's got some deep roots.
So he lived in the house where the Idaho 4 murders took place?
Yes, sir. His parents owned it.
Wow. All right, no connection there.
Yeah, that's creepy, right? Not sure what to make of that, but we see Scott Green taking that job at the very same time we see Sam Bankman-Fried and his buddy John Shalapin, another one of these creepy money laundering bank guys out of the Bahamas, who has his company has roots to that same BCCI scandal as Leon Black. Right, so we see two different angles of BCCI converging here in and around this Scott Green fella, because Scott Green's law firm represented FTX and Binance, and while Scott Green was gone at the time when Binance and FTX tried to merge in 2022, his firm was the firm that did the merger. So, but before we get there, we see this ongoing enterprises of these money laundering. We see them converge there. When Scott Green takes that job as the University of Idaho president, Sam Bankman-Fried and his buddy are paying off the state of Washington's bank regulators in order to mix crypto and banking under one roof in a small rural bank that's 110 years old in Farmington, Washington, 45 miles north of both campuses. So we see these pieces. Now we can look back and see these pieces being moved in position. Scott Green's leaving that law firm and then taking that job at University of Idaho president. I would argue he's kind of the manager, the district manager of all these operations. And doing so, we see at the same time they're paying off a state banking regulator who would later become the chief legal counsel for Moonstone Bank, this money laundering cash for crypto bank that no one's been charged with. It gets seized 6 weeks after the murders in December 2022, but no one gets charged with anything relative to this. Even the state of Washington banking regulator turned chief legal counsel for this money laundering bank.
So yeah, is it Moonstar? Did you say Moonstar Bank?
Moonstone, yes,
Bank. Okay, yeah. And there was some questionable activity leading right up to when that bank was shut down, right? I mean, some serious money being moved in and out of that bank that we really didn't have any idea of what was going on until it was all said and done.
Well, yes, sir, big time. So they paid off the state banking regulators, the FDIC. So here's the chain of events that I would argue is the motive. If there is indeed this large-scale drug trafficking associated with these Greek, fraternities and sororities on both these campuses, and there's a large amount of evidence supporting that, eyewitness testimony, historical reports, and what appears to be ongoing enterprises, again, amongst that house as being a distribution point. So that was the off-campus sorority, quote-unquote sorority and fraternity house that had been occupied from 1999 till 2017 by Sigma Chi, the fraternity associated with these matters, where Ethan Chapin was a former member of, because he was on suspension because of his grades. He'd failed. He was on his second year as a freshman at the college, had been suspended from the fraternity. That's a key component to understanding the victimology in this case. All the murdered victims had all quit their fraternity or sorority, right? So what seems like that house had been operating as a drug distribution point for these fraternities and sororities, Sigma Chi for 17 years, then Pi Beta Phi. So how Kaylee Gonzalez, this Alpha Sigma girl, allegedly got in there, I don't ever buy that story to begin with. The mixing and mashing, unless she had already left her sorority, what I think is what occurred, and she had nowhere else to live except for move in with her friend, right? So I think that's how she got in this house. But nonetheless, the Pi Beta Phis and the Sigma Chi seem to have been managing this as a distribution point, it seems, right? So, and that's the other female victims in that home. The two murdered victims and the two surviving were all allegedly Pi Beta Phi, right? So we see that as being a component, I believe. And if these folks all left their sororities and fraternities, which they have documented as doing so, all four murdered victims, right, all had left. Kaylee Gonzalez was graduating early. I argue she left her sorority because she was living in that house. And I would argue that Zana Kernodle and Madison Mogan left their sorority, Pi Beta Phi, back in September, late August, September, because the sorority confirmed as much, and so does their photographs. They're no longer in any photographs. The surviving roommate, Bethany Funk's in the sorority photographs for Pi Beta Phi. Dylan Mortensen appears in no official photographs for Pi Beta Phi. I argue Dylan Mortensen is a fake sorority member, fake college student. It's not without precedent. That same thing was going on in Pullman, Washington, just a few years earlier in a fraternity. Large-scale cocaine trafficking. The person at the ringleader that got busted was not a member of the fraternity nor a student. Yet everyone in that fraternity was playing along, pretending like he was a member of fraternity. So everyone else, all the other fraternities and sororities all believed he was a member. So it was not known to any of the other sororities and fraternities of the fraud until it became about. And I make that point to paint the environment we're looking at here. If this is the case, the only people that would know Dylan Mortensen's faking it is the Pi Beta Phis. And they're deeply ingrained in all these activities for years preceding this drug distribution point. So I would argue these four victims left their sororities and fraternities, right? And on November 9th, when Scott Green's law firm, the president of the University of Idaho, and his law firm failed that merger with Binance and FTX, thereby causing FTX to file emergency bankruptcy on November 11th, 2022, right? And thereby the whole world found out they bought this weird bank in rural Washington and were doing some obviously fraudulent activities, money laundering, and the FDIC seized on it immediately, the DOJ 6 weeks later in December. But yes, you're right. Even in the FDIC reports, Ron, there's a large volume and increase of cash the moment they step in there, and no one in the FDIC batted an eye, get the fuck out of here. There's 1,000% increase overnight in deposits.
It was millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Overnight, you can't have 1,000% increase, and the FDIC is like, what? We didn't know about that.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah. Yeah, I always say, well, we know the FDIC, that ain't nothing but a Ponzi scheme. I mean, everybody puts their money in the bank and they're like, well, I'm covered up to 200 grand or 250 or whatever it is, whatever the amount is.
Right. Whatever they want to claim it's to be. I'd like to see them ever value that.
But it's proven that they don't have nearly enough money to cover
Ron.
deposits.
They got balls. They got a lot of them, too. I'll tell you that much. They got some balls. So if I'm just to put a quick book note on that, so November 9th, we have the University of Idaho president's little law firm failing this merger. We have November 10th, and the important detail in this victimology, Dylan Mortensen drives up near that Nazi compound up there north of Coeur d'Alene to Rathdrum, Idaho, to personally invite Kaylee Gonzalez back to campus that weekend. And that's confirmed. She drove up there personally after Kaylee was ignoring her phone calls because, again, it seems like she didn't want to go back to campus ever again, right? So that's important to know because November 9th, that deal fell out. So FTX had known. Somebody knew. Wheels were in motion that day to file emergency bankruptcy on the 11th. It is suspicious that Kaylee Gonzalez is lured back to campus on November 10th in between these two very vital dates because less than 36 hours after FTX files emergency bankruptcy and the whole world finds out about that money laundering operation, those young adults are dead. They're murdered in their home. And I would argue this is they were liabilities when shit hit the fan and, suddenly these loose ends and liabilities had to be taken care of.
Right, because she was acting like she didn't want to go back there. And this is another reason why they left their sororities, right? Because maybe they didn't want anything to do with any of this. Who knows? And we've all talked about the mother and the stepmother of two of the victims. We're both in trouble for drug trafficking or drug sales.
You're right, trafficking.
Yeah.
Yep. The meth and the Xander Cornetto's mom got busted for meth and heroin trafficking.
See, that's why, a few episodes ago when we were talking about this, I said it's almost like this is a cartel message. And this would be, standard operating procedure for them. I mean, they heinous murders. I mean, they'll kill people in unimaginable ways, right? And they don't care.
It's the worst cartel imaginable.
They don't care if they're young, old, babies. They don't care, right? They've proven that. That's why
I think it's the worst cartel imaginable. It's the cartel that manages the cartels. Like I was saying, that U.S., if I may interject, that U.S. attorney that was managing the field in this network of this Gladio operations of Bill Colby that seemed to be ongoing with special forces, the state of Idaho, and that Nazi compound, all being major components, and these domestic terror campaigns that we've seen before out of there, and maybe going on right now with all the stuff we're seeing. But another anniversary of those campaigns, right? Which is what they do, and they're big on anniversaries. But what I'm saying here is, if this is true, then we're looking at the same ongoing patterns and behavior. Repeating pattern.
This is massive, JJ. This is massive.
That's what I'm saying.
This comes down from the government to the courts to the university system to the banking system. I mean. They had to give Sam Bankman-Fried up to take the spotlight off of them. They had to let FTX do its thing because There's a strong argument for that. Okay, well, what
I'm saying. Scott Green's law firm is so involved in those activities. That's what I'm saying. This is the worst cartel imaginable. This is the folks, when I'm saying the U.S. attorney's clearing the landscape, these are the folks, the ongoing enterprises, right, of these operations have been going on. The film Lethal Weapon depicts all of these things. You have ongoing enterprises of the special forces of Bill Colby's Gladio, Air America, Project Phoenix. They're all depicted in that film. And it's the ongoing enterprises, as they tell you in the film, from the 60s to the 80s. This is still now ongoing today, and that's what we're dealing with. But that's what I'm saying. This is the worst cartel. This is the cartel that takes out the Mexican cartel. This is the cartel that takes out the Aryan cartel. These are the folks who are the worst of the worst.
Right, the military component, you mean? Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because, even there was a guy on the Sean Ryan show, and he was saying, these cartel members, they think they're going to do this and they're going to do that. They're going to wage war against the American government. They want to wage war against the U.S. military. He said they could send in not the A or the B or the C team, and they would still be in trouble. He said these cartels have no idea what they're up against if the Americans sent in their A teams, special forces, to deal with them, because they would all be dead. No question about it. And Trump even offered up to the Mexican president, the one before the one that we have now, the Jewish president, the one before that, he said, listen, I can take care of this cartel problem for you. Just give me authorization to send my boys in. And they turned him down. Because they're in on the fix too, JJ.
Well, yeah, what you're saying is all great, is all very important details and great points. So if you apply those same concepts and understand what we saw in Iran-Contra, which was a small team working out of the White House led by Oliver North, incorporating elements of various intelligence agencies and special forces units to do hood rat shit on domestic soil. That's the same things we're seeing right now, in my opinion.
Right.
JJ, with all this hood rat shit, right, that the government and the military is intricately entwined in, does it make you feel differently about your personal military service?
No, not at all.
Like, you don't. Okay, because once I started kind of becoming aware of everything that's been kind of going on in the world and what we're contributing to the destruction of the entire world and just society in general, it made me kind of look back on my time, in the Air Force kind of differently. I didn't know if you kind of had that same perspective or not.
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to share what my thoughts are, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I mean, my thoughts were that, I was at a point in the military where I got a flag, flown over on a B-1 bombing mission over Afghanistan when I was stationed in Qatar in 2013, because I thought that was the coolest thing ever, Sure. And then I kind of start becoming aware of, so I start becoming aware of really, our position in the world and what we're contributing to the deaths, of these hundreds of thousands, if not millions of innocent people. And it just really changed my perspective of going from thinking that was, a noble thing to do, is to have that flag and what it stood for with that certificate that they gave me. It literally listed the different ordinances that were dropped during that mission. And so now I
got one of those.
Yeah. I can't even look at the thing. You know what I mean? Because to me, it just,
I understand,
pure evil. And
it makes sense.
It's hard for me to comprehend and come to the terms of like, that was, I mean, I understand that was one part of my life and then I moved on from it, but knowing that in a way I contributed to that, not directly, but definitely indirectly by just the job that I working on, doing aircraft maintenance stuff. Like that's what I was. I was a machinist and welder in the Air Force, and I indirectly contributed to the deaths of potentially hundreds of thousands of people. And that really bothers me. And then with all this other ongoing hood rush shit that they're doing, knowing that I was, a small cog, a very, very, very small, but a very small cog in that wheel. It just doesn't make me feel good about my time in the service, No,
I hear you. I certainly don't agree with war in general, or the wars that I even, was obviously involved in. I did 5 years in the Middle East. The way I looked at it was I joined in 1998. You know what I mean? The way I looked at it was when we did go to war, I was like, well, I guess I was either not go or, go and impose my values on the situation, which is what I do in life, generally speaking. So, I always try to improve the environment that I'm in, and there's a reason I made Master Sergeant in my Air Force career in 10 years for a young Master Sergeant. Some say I was one of the youngest there. I don't know.
That's unheard of.
I was just going to insert that humble brag for Ron's humor. He didn't catch up on that one. But I also retired a Master Sergeant because I had no problem telling a lot of high-ranking folks, much higher than me, colonels included, that this is America, and I'm not going to fucking do that. And I'm not going to let you fucking do that. So that got me in a lot of trouble. But that was my attitude towards it. If these things are going to go, I figured if these things are going to go on, and especially when the initial onset of the war, which I was over in, I was in Baghdad in March of 2004. That sounds right. I was in Qatar in November of 2003, and we were dropping off supplies and people in all these different places. But I obviously was visiting Baghdad as early as March 2004, and I literally handed the keys over to the Department of State in September of 2011. That sounds right. As a master sergeant, I found going back over to Iraq more favorable to Washington D.C. So I left headquarters and went over there and signed it back over again. I just figured if someone's going to do this, I'm gonna make sure it's done right. You know what I mean? So, and that's just kind of the way I looked at my career. I don't make decisions about where things go and how things happen, but I also I always did my best to. And then the way I looked at my whole goal was to just again. I knew where my values stood in life. So, as far as not necessarily imposing my values on other people, but not letting some hood rat shit go down anywhere in or around my activity. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's why I got out. Got me in a lot of trouble.
Well, I think that's why I got out when I did, because I was offered a lot of incentives to stay in, but I just, my principals wouldn't allow me to. Yeah. Bonuses, trips, places. And I just couldn't do it because it just goes against, it went against everything that I felt deep down. So I know exactly what you mean by kind of sticking to those principles and not letting somebody run you over when you know that it's wrong.
Well, when you look at not to interrupt JJ, but when you look at the whole picture, knowing what we know now about the fake WMDs in Iraq, how we went into Afghanistan when we knew that Osama bin Laden possibly wasn't even there. And a lot of this stuff, people view them as separate things that happened when in actuality, it's all part of the big theater. It's all part of the big game, right? Now, when you talk about FTX, right, you're thinking, oh, this is just some greedy crypto guy that took Tom Brady's $20 million and this person's money and this person's money. What they're forgetting is that when under the Biden administration, when all this money was being sent to Ukraine, a portion of that money in Ukraine got kicked back to FTX in Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yes, sir. Go
ahead.
No, I'd say if I may just before we get into that real quick, if I may put a book in on Rick's statements. I do appreciate your question there, Rick. I'll tell you, and to your statement there you just made as well, Ron, and to understand the greater totality of what we're discussing here, especially when we're talking about domestic terror events and Gladio stuff, like these are much like 9/11. Organized generated events for our theater, if you will, and to perpetrate new laws and tyrannical laws and introduce those and say, oh, we have to have these laws now. I mean, did you see the building fall down? We need these laws. So we know all that's bullshit. That's what I'm saying. We look back, we can see all those. We apply those same standards to what we're seeing today. It's going to be the same shit. You know what I mean? We see the same characters doing the same activities, right? Doing the same hood rat shit. But I'll tell you an unpopular thing to come to a realization is I thought the wars were bullshit and all those things. I really bought into all that nonsense again. But when I was watching Loose Change on Netflix, of all things, back when Netflix still had things that you could watch of value, right? So this is probably December of 2012. So, and, you can't go work at Air Force headquarters and have water cooler talk about how there's no Muslims and it was all created by the government. You know what I mean? That's not a popular opinion to have at the water cooler talk. So, I went through that experience in my life for sure. And that was when I left and went in the reserves and finished my career out there. It was shortly thereafter.
Yeah, it's, we're talking about the Idaho 4 murder case, right? We're talking about Brian Koberger, just this one dude, right?
Yep.
But it has global implications, in my opinion, when you see the bigger picture of what's going on. And you understand how certain politicians are all tied into this whole scam. Because you got FTX getting money kicked back from Ukraine. FTX is taking that money. He's funneling it down to just before the 2020 elections, right? Or no, the midterms. During the midterms, I think was the big thing, 2022, which would be the right dates, right? And he's donating all this money to all these Democrats' campaigns, right? And then
and funneling the Ukraine money back, right? You were right on that.
That's it.
So
that's what I'm talking about. That's the Ukraine money. It's all getting kicked back. And then when Zelensky comes out, he said, well, we only got about half of that money that was allocated to us. So where's the other half? Like nobody is asking these questions. Like, where's the money? They always say, follow the money. Where's the money? That's what I want to know. Where's the money? And here's what it is.
Points.
All this money is funneled back for black ops, like you say, these military operations that are happening and could be what we call rogue factions of the military, or the military that's controlled by the deep state globalists or whatever you want to call it. We do have the baddest ass military.
Let's call it
in the world.
national security.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, under the guise of national security, and it all culminates to the state of Idaho and Washington, where these strange banking things were going on, that banking regulators have turned a blind eye to. The FDIC turned a blind eye to.
And no one's getting charged? No one's getting charged at all?
Nobody's getting anything because people are focused on Kohberger, right? So this is what leads me to believe that Kohberger is, to get back to where we even started this, Kohberger pleading guilty to something that I still don't think he did. I don't.
Oh, he definitely didn't do. The state's produced no evidence either.
Anonymous Sean believes that he did it, and he's got his angles and things like that.
What do you think his biggest piece of evidence is?
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
I have to, I was really, I probably could have got a chance to have him come on with us tonight, but him and I have discussions about this, and I'm like, he says Kohberger did it, but he wasn't alone. He was part of the process. So
here's the deal. I mean, here's the deal, though. I understand where he's coming from, Ron, because it's part of the magic show. And I don't ever fault folks for subscribing to the magic show, but someone because at the end of the day, someone wants to believe that the media has not been lying to us outright so badly, especially in regards to this high profile situation, right? But it's the truth.
In order for this to transpire, for Kohberger to do this, and then the house is completely cleaned, and they have one footprint that has blood on it, allegedly.
Yeah, the state failed to tie a nexus point between the criminal, the victims, and the crime scene.
And then before the case is even concluded, because the case still isn't concluded, they destroy the house. They destroy the crime scene. So
Ron, they wanted to destroy the crime scene before Brian Kohberger ever got back to Idaho. So on December 30th,
they wanted to do it 2 weeks after.
No, they had a crew. They had a destruction crew in the driveway on December 30th when he's sitting in a Pennsylvania jail cell in Monroe County because the FBI just kicked down his parents' front door in the middle of the night. For what reason, no one's ever described why it was necessary to do that. But they had to make it look like he was guilty and running away, so they had to make it look like he's a arch criminal, so they had to kick down his door in the middle of the night and scare the shit out of his family. Nonetheless, he's sitting in a jail cell. They already dispatched the crew. Ann Taylor, his defense attorney, first action she did at 8:30 in the morning. Literally, the crew's in the driveway. They're in the home. She gets an order from the judge to cease and desist immediately. Mm-hmm. She has to go over there and tell the crew to leave.
My point is they shouldn't have destroyed the house till after the case was done. And
for sure. Sure.
I mean, they
wanted that shit gone immediately, though, right?
They want it gone because they don't want it's a huge factor in the evidence against Kohberger. You would think, from a prosecution standpoint, why would they want to get rid of a piece of evidence? This is a huge cover-up, JJ. This whole thing is a huge cover-up. And these 4 people that were murdered there were sacrifices to some degree. Kohberger.
If you want me to go full process here, Ron, I'll go full process. I was trying to keep it to the facts here, the known knowns, if you will, but I'm happy to go into more speculative territory based upon the available evidence and circumstantial evidence.
Well, let's do it. That's what Wicked Planet's all about.
So when we're talking about the destruction of the house, they wanted it gone. Like I said, they wanted it gone for dude was ever extradited back to Idaho, and it wasn't for Ann Taylor as a defense attorney. That thing would have been gone that day, right? So December 30th, 2022, the same day they arrested Brian Kohberger, the same day the world found out the name Brian Kohberger. 2 weeks before that, the law enforcement removed a piece of drywall. It's alleged the reason was because they didn't say why. I say why. My allegations are it was a message written on that in blood, much like you see at the Charles Manson murder situation and the Jeffrey McDonald situation at Fort Bragg, because we got a lot of Fort Bragg connections here, right? Jeffrey McDonald, the special warfare Green Beret medical doctor at Fort Bragg, whose family was murdered in the months after the Manson murders in Los Angeles. Same deal, though. Same 4 people brutally murdered and stabbed in the middle of the night in their sleep. Sound familiar, Ron?
Yeah.
Manson family, McDonald, and this one. So, also in December of 2022, an article ran in the Globe tabloids. Manson family murder, new Manson family cult murders Idaho victims. Right? You need to bring up I got an image of that for you right here if you'd like to see it. So, President Scott Green, the University of Idaho, wrote a book in 2023. He published it in December, and he says that he's the one who removed this article from all media. So that's interesting. So if there was this published at the same time, these folks are removing drywall from the scene shortly thereafter, and they cite police sources in this. It is a tabloid, but tabloids, not the first time they'd have a story correct, right? So there is that aspect to it. So it is interesting to me that old Scott Green there is so associated with all the other things. He's also the one that removes this from any media, right? And again, they cite numerous folks, including a major police, a retired police captain from Chicago, who's a private investigator, and he says he's the one who's talking to police sources. So it ain't just the Globe that's talking to these sources there.
Okay, so what JJ is sharing with me right now, JJ, I will have you send me a copy of that screenshot. And it's the Globe tabloid. It shows the victims, and it says "Helter Skelter" message scrawled in blood. New Manson cult butchered Idaho co-eds. This is the first I have heard anything about them removing a piece of drywall. Why would they remove a piece of drywall unless something was inscribed or there was some form of evidence on that drywall?
Exactly, sir. So if anyone's familiar with the Manson family murders, they had pig and other things written in the victim's blood. Same with McDonald murders. And again, I would assert that could be the case here because it seems that when they were so ready to tear that down on December 30th, 2022, the house, that is the crime scene, and they emptied it all in that moving truck on December 7th, the same day they asked the world to help them find their suspects. The same morning, within moments, right, they drove that U-Haul over there, the chief of police himself. Very, very unprecedented behavior. So they really wanted this house down, and then in between those events, December 7th and December 30th, they removed drywall, allegedly from the upstairs bedroom of where Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez were located.
This is one of Sean's angles, is that it is a group of serial killers that was involved in this Idaho 4 murder. He said a group of serial killers that possibly could or could not be working for some government faction, or for somebody deep state or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Just somebody from the dark side. You're
making some good points. You're using a lot of terms to describe the same entity, and you can call it the process. It is this deep state national security entity that is dealing. I'm trying to share a new screen with you. Let me see here. Stop that one. That has been dealing. They've been the number one game in dealing drugs in this nation for a long time. It's what revolves around the Manson situation with drug trafficking. Again, this is what they're known for. Documented in law enforcement reports for decades. Documented in the works of authors Ed Sanders and Maury Terry. That is the process. So when you have these things in mind, can y'all see this Muppet?
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's Victoria Gooch, a.k.a. the Gooch. She's an Idaho State Police detective, and I didn't know her name until January of 2025, despite her actions in December of 2022 being involved in every vital key piece of evidence in the effort to frame Bryan Kohberger. For example, that interview with Dylan Mortensen, the frozen shock face comment that was later argued out of court and proven false through cell phone activities of Dylan Mortensen, that was in the original affidavit to arrest Bryan Kohberger. That was courtesy of an interview with Dylan Mortensen and the Gooch in December of 2022. And on that note, that was, again, due to all this being sealed, this was not released publicly until a hearing in January. She was also the Idaho State Police detective who was involved in the investigative genetic genealogy and the alleged transport of that DNA evidence to the Othram lab in Texas. Again, not documented, but alleged it was her. because no one documented. There is no chain of evidence, right? Chain of custody. So the gooch, we find out, is very integral in this entire story and narrative and frame job, but we didn't know her name at all. She's not a lead investigator in anything for the Idaho State Police nor Moscow. So it's interesting. So then she does an interview in October of 2023 that someone sends me. She tells a story of her life story and how the reason she got into law enforcement for 30-some years was because of the Manson family murders and the murder of Sharon Tate specifically. So her father was a U.S. Army intelligence officer and protege of Colonel Paul Tate, U.S. Army intelligence officer and father of actress Sharon Tate. And if anyone's familiar with the Manson lore, in the immediate aftermath of the August 9th, 1969 murder of Sharon Tate, Paul Tate, her U.S. Army intelligence father, moved to California, grew his hair long, grew a beard, and infiltrated the hippie movement and to investigate his daughter's murder. Victoria Gooch here tells a story of how her father, the protege U.S. Army intelligence officer of Paul Tate, they traveled with him to San Francisco, and he did the same for the next 4 years. Not my words, hers. So isn't that weird? We have direct connections from the Manson family murders itself to the Idaho murders, as well as these other matters, such as that publication in the Globe and whatnot.
And tied into the murders at Fort Bragg.
And there you go. And we see Fort Bragg pop up again, back to Detective Brett Payne, the lead detective from Moscow, the rookie cop. Why is he the rookie cop, Ron? Why is a rookie cop in charge of this investigation?
Yeah, no, they would have put their top guy on that. You kidding me?
So would you believe that, if I just made it real quick, Rick, would you believe that Brett Payne arrives to the murder scene at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 hours after the 911 call on 11/13/2022, 8 hours after the murders allegedly, right? The roommate's not calling for 8 hours, that is. So this is 12 hours later. They arrive, 4 p.m. It's now Captain Blaker, who was the chief of detectives at the time, Sergeant Blaker at the time of the homicide, is now Captain Blaker of the department. He's the chief of detectives. He arrives on scene with Brett Payne, the rookie cop. He's not even a detective. He's a corporal. Not even a detective. They make him the lead detective despite him arriving on the scene at the very same time in the reports as the chief of detectives. Make that one make sense for me, Ron.
Yeah, none of this case makes sense. None.
So I would argue,
and I mean, we're just lay people, right? Well, we kind of aren't, but I mean, a lot of other people have looked into this, and everybody is in agreement that this isn't simple. This isn't a simple act of just a guy killing 4 people. It's not. This has wider implications. We will never know the answer to this. And this is why, in my opinion, Kohberger's going to plead guilty if he hasn't already.
What's the external forces in the matter? We saw a war zone out there. Somebody, in my opinion, had threatened, again, so we're looking at, if I may kind of just put a book in all these statements, I know I want to get back to you, Rick. I didn't mean to cut you off there, bud. But so if we look at all these things going on, these ongoing drug enterprises, these connections from L.A. in 69 to Idaho in 2022, why this detective's involved in the frame job, right? We see these ongoing national security style enterprises all also connected to that Nazi compound where Mark Furman is. He's been commenting on this case, telling everybody how Kohberger's guilty despite being a Nazi felon on paper. You know what I mean? No one asked him, hey, Mark, why are you a felon? We just want your opinion on law and crime stuff. But, you know, no one ever asked him, hey, why are you a Nazi felon? You know what I mean? No one ever asked him these questions. So we see the media campaign being dishonest around all of these elements in the ongoing years continuously still today. And I have to say that that's what we're dealing with here. And with the money launderers being the same over the years connected to this, the connections going on to the drug enterprises, right? The murder, the associated same styles of murder, right? So Fort Bragg, Brett Payne comes from Fort Bragg, and he's got a top secret clearance to the U.S. Army to date as a reserve officer, major military police. So I would argue that's the reason why he was the lead detective. He had the clearance.
Did they give an official reason? Like, did the department give an official reason why Brett Payne was assigned as the lead detective for the case?
Negative, sir. Negative.
And nobody asked any questions, right? The local media, the national media, they just let it slide.
To Steve Gonsalves, the victim's father, Kaylee Gonsalves' father, to his credit, he threw a shit show of a hissy fit in good form for about 6 weeks in the media before he stopped talking.
Yeah, you know.
Because he was told to shut up.
Yeah,
but that's what he kept saying. Why do you have a rookie cop on this case? Why do you have a rookie cop on this case?
Well, this rookie cop came from Fort Bragg, and he had a top secret security clearance.
Yep. And if I may leave, I know we're ending here. If I may leave one more note on matters of national security, there's a lot of bullshit stories that have been perpetrated in the media, like they did with Orenthal, James Simpson. Same network and crew. If you ask me, doing both of these jobs, frame up jobs. In fact, Ashley Banfield made her name covering the OJ trial of Vegas. That's how she became nationally known. So a lot of OJ connections in this stuff. But and Cocaine Bob's underling, the guy who introduced Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, fellow Process Church member Cocaine Bob Evans, his protege, Graydon Carter, runs an operation called Airmail. You probably never heard of it because it's a pointless publication. But on January 7th, 2023, this Airmail publication hires Howard Bloom, and he publishes the first article in Propaganda to incriminate Brian Kohberger the day after Kohberger's extradited to Idaho. Every media outlet since then, on January 7th, 2023, has quoted Howard Bloom. He's the point man. And isn't it strange that we have another connection back to the Manson family murders through Howard Bloom's boss, Graydon Carter, the direct protege of Bob Cocaine Evans? When I say that, Bob entrusted one man to direct his life story, the executive producer of The Kid Stays in the Picture, his autobiopic documentary. Mm-hmm. That man was Graydon Carter. So... Process
Bob Cocaine, how does he appear in everything? Like, how is there it's just wild.
He's the devil.
It's just there's so many different things you talk about, and his name always pops up in it, and you're able to directly connect him or tangentially connect him to all these different things. And it's just wild how he seems to be the nexus of all of this activity.
For sure. And when I say the process drug trafficking stuff, Bob, their old Cocaine Bob, gets indicted for the murder of Roy Radin in 1988 in Los Angeles County, California, along with the head of the Medellin cartel, Karen Greenberger. So the Medellin cocaine cartel. She was the number one person in America because she just murked her husband 6 months prior, Larry Greenberger. He was really the number one cartel dude for the Medellins in America. This is the Carlos Lader, Pablo Escobar cocaine cartel of Iran-Contra fame. She had just murked her husband because her husband, Larry, was just named in the federal court proceedings of Carlos Lader's trial as their number one guy in America. So suddenly Larry dies. She's now being investigated for that murder 30 years after the fact. She's in prison today for the murder of Roy Radin from 1988, and Bob walked. Old Cocaine Bob said, nope, not me. Unindicted co-conspirator, I plead the fifth. His attorney, Robert Shapiro, the prosecutor for L.A. County, Charles Manson's friend, Ira Reiner. Not my statement, their own. He actually represented one of the Manson girls in the defense trial in 1970.
And is this the same Shapiro that became the defense attorney and was one of OJ's attorneys?
Yes, sir. In fact, OJ never hired anybody. He hired his best friend, Robert Kardashian, who told him, hire Robert Shapiro, and Robert Shapiro compiled the Nightmare Team.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's Bob's attorney. Bob and old Bob and Bob there, Robert Shapiro and Cocaine Bob, they go way back. But to put one more book in all these national security matters back to Fort Bragg and all these lies in this propaganda against Kohberger, I did a show on my show, Operation GCD, live Wednesdays, kind of unpacking the parapolitical and propaganda aspects, because I tracked down a lot of these people and pulling out their stories as perpetrated in the media, making claims that Kohberger hates anybody or is abusive or is violent or is a drug addict. All of these people, I have pointed out their statements are completely bunk because the narrative in which they're selling is how they know Kohberger is demonstrably false. For example, a fellow the first guy who really inserted the heroin addict thing, said he went to high school with him or junior high and then through high school and they quit being friends in high school. I have his yearbooks. That dude never went to Brian Kohberger's school. That kid's father is a retired command sergeant major from 7th Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg. So why is the son of the command sergeant major of the 7th Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg telling demonstrable lies in the media? Why is the media printing it about how Brian Kohberger is a heroin addict? So that's the high weirdness, Ron, that we're dealing with here.
Well, I think we're gonna have to revisit this again. We're not ready to shut the door on this case yet, like for sure. Because all these connections, and the people listening to this episode right now are probably like, okay, my brain is bouncing around like a pinball machine. How is all this stuff connected? Trust me, listeners, it's connected.
Listen to it again. I definitely understand the blowing up some brain holes. Listen to it again, folks, of the interwebs. And I do a weekly roundup of all these ideas and discussions over on a YouTube channel called Kane B's The Purge.
Yes,
co-host
Rick was
over
telling
there.
me about that. Yeah, I got to get caught up on a few shows too. You know, I've always been fascinated with this Idaho 4 case. I've always said right along that Brian Kohlberger didn't do it. If he did do it, he didn't do it alone. This is Anonymous Sean's angle. He said it's part of a group of killers that go around the country and they kill people for somebody.
He's not wrong. There is an element to that in this town. Hudson Lindau died a smiley-faced killer style. He was a fraternity member who knew these victims. He died in May 1st. This is very, very occult day, April 30th, May 1st. He disappears April 30th from a fraternity party that the victims were at, and he is found in a creek nearby in 3 inches of water on May 1st, and allegedly died of accidental drowning, ruled by not everyone's favorite coroner, Ron Kathy Mabutt.
Yeah. Yeah, her name comes up quite often.
But that's a smiley face killer profile right there for sure. So Anonymous Sean in off target, but I would say I'm not going to believe any aspect of Cobra had anything to do with this other than being a patsy until someone shows me one legitimate piece of evidence that the state's argued that he didn't know these victims.
Well, you know
what I mean?
You know what? If they get a guilty plea from Kohlberger and Kohlberger does his thing, maybe Kohlberger's doing this to save the rest of his family, because if they did this to these 4 people, they could do it to anybody.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. So there's a case, and if I can, I gotta end here in about 10 minutes, Ron, if you don't mind. But the process stuff and what you just said about the frame job stuff and pressuring families in May of 1999. Y'all familiar with the book Fight Club, the movie Fight Club? May of 1999. Author Chuck Palahniuk, the author of the book, his father is murdered in Latall County, Idaho, I think it's May 29th, 1999. He allegedly meets this woman in a classified ad. He lives nearby. He meets a woman in a classified ad, goes to meet her at this cabin in southern Latall County near Kendrick, Idaho, about 20 miles south of Moscow, and is allegedly ambushed by that woman's ex-husband at her cabin there, and then the cabin's burned up in flames, right? So that's Chuck Palahniuk's father. The woman's ex-husband was later... He just won his U.S. Supreme Court appeal to not get the death penalty for these 2 murders, but he was railroaded in the same capacity Brian Kohlberger was, in my opinion. He's a scumbag, so he's a little bit tougher to defend, but they railroad him the same manner. Not to get too far into the forensics and particulars, as I'll be doing a show on that here soon. What they did there to get him was they had no evidence. So, and they even admit that they admitted in their statements in court, we have nothing tying this man to the crime. The prosecutor says that, and it's Bill Thompson. So he admits that even in the closing statements, they pressured his fiance and his fiance's mother to testify against him, and when they wouldn't, he charged them with accessories after the fact, and charged his fiance's father with obstruction of justice. Then they later dropped his obstruction of justice charge to testify against the 2 women and the soon-to-be son-in-law. So the dynamics of these things are all at play here, I think, as well. And pressuring Brian. The state said Kohlberger called his folks and sent a selfie that morning of 11/13/2022. So my assessment is, I have nothing. This is all my assumption, that Bill Thompson's playing the same book. He's pressuring his parents, saying you guys were accessories to murder. He called you in the immediate aftermath. Granted, they have nothing to even tie him to the crime or even knowing the victims. But this is what they did to Dale Shackelford, right? And this is how ridiculous the evidence was in Shackelford's case. His ex-wife had a hysterectomy 3 years prior to her murder. The woman's body who was shot and then burnt up in this cabin, again, that the state recognized they had no evidence at all connecting Dale Shackelford to, she had a uterus. So by the evidence, she could not have been his ex-wife in the first place. You know what I mean? But they prosecuted this man, pressured his fiancée and his mother, put them in prison once they pressured the father to testify against them. So that whole situation, I think we saw play out here. No evidence against Kohlberger. Then they see this phone call and that selfie that everyone got to see, right, in the shower after the murder, as they say. He called his parents around that same time. So I think the state said, look, you guys are accessories to murder. We're either going to charge you and then force him to take that guilty plea.
Yeah.
Wow.
We definitely got to come back to this, because this story is far from over. This case will be talked about for years, in my opinion.
Yes, sir. I think you and I both agreed on that. I think from I think it was July 12th, 2023, when we first convened on these matters, Ron. And I appreciate your time and conversation as always. But we both said this is going to be a landmark case. And
not only that, once he pleads guilty, case closed. whatever evidence is there will conveniently disappear. Everything will disappear. Everything will go off the books, and nothing will ever be said about it again. And we won't hear anything about Brian Koberger in prison until somebody in prison kills him. And if he goes to prison, I'm telling you right now, that's what's going to happen. Just like how they couldn't wait to kill Jeffrey Dahmer in jail. Somebody is going to kill him if he goes to prison.
These are all valid concerns, and not only I don't think the gag order was going to be lifted, whatever happened to that special prosecutor that the judge appointed last month in regards to all these obvious leaks and stuff like that? That goes away now too, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off, Rick, before. Did you have something else you were going to say before?
No. I agree with you guys. This is a landmark case, and it's very convenient that now that he pled guilty, that there is no chance for him to appeal this. So, like you said, everything's just going to disappear. It's going to kind of go out into the ether, and the only people that are going to really be looking into this are people like us that are still just fascinated by the fact pattern and just the lack of evidence and just all the holes in the story. And like you just mentioned with the special prosecutor, like that's just so convenient that was, that's just going to go by the wayside. So all those leaks that happened during that case with that specific gag order that was in place is just mute now.
I'm not an attorney. I'm also not the vice president, sir, but he will have some opportunities to appeal these unconstitutional matters with the U.S. Supreme Court, which is what Dale Shackelford was successful in doing.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens moving forward. JJ, I know you got to go. Sorry, we had some of our time taken away from my computer glitch. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I always love getting together with you. You want to let the listeners know where they can find you in Operation GCD?
Dude, I'm working so hard these days, Ron. No, I'm just joking. I've engaged in some new operations at Operation GCD. I'm putting out a number of shenanigan-infused shows. Shenanigan-infused journeys into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. Sundays, Wednesdays I do are going to be film reviews, my Operation GCD Wednesdays. Thursdays I'm doing the anatomy of satanic panic, unpacking the psychological operations that have caused these ideas of satanic panic, as well as the actual real world crimes, murders and sexual ritual abuse, largely focused around another one of Bill Colby's characters, is one of his queers, Michael Aquino, go figure. A man who made his bones in the Phoenix program. The Phoenix program that murdered 32,000 civilians documented, not to mention the psychological warfare.
And not to mention his background.
There you go. And so that's my Thursdays. And then Fridays, I'd like to extend and invite both you gents to join me on a Fridays where I do a roundtable discussion. Ron's joined me a number of times in the past. Do a roundtable discussion on various conspiracy culture topics and whatnot. So definitely appreciate both your gentlemen's time, and definitely looking forward to more conversations in the future as always, Ron. Always great to join some fellow New Englanders on some conversations of, liberty and such matters.
Yeah, JJ, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you. It's always a whirlwind of information when you're on. Whenever we get together, sometimes I have a hard time keeping up, and I'm pretty good at keeping up. But anyways, yeah, you can find JJ on X. What is your handle there?
At Operation GCD should be at Twixter and Instagram and Patreon. Patreon.com at Operation GCD. I'm going to put all the JJ's links in the show notes, and anybody you want to go check out his stuff, just click on it and go scope it out. And Rick and I, sometime we will join you on Fridays again. I got to get set up so I can do some podcasting from home. And I got to invest I have a nice computer at home. I am not bringing it to work. So, but anyways, JJ Vance, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to cut you off now. I know you got to go. You got another show you got to do, but I'm going to talk to you real soon, my friend. Thank you both for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. All right. Thank you, JJ. Take care. So, Rick, was your mind thoroughly blown tonight? Yeah, I just love the way that he presents everything, man. It's just so good. Like JJ's research is insane. Yeah. How he finds he just recall all that information. Yeah. Like immediately. Yeah, it's impressive. That's just how his brain works. I mean, he was military police and investigator and all that. And now that he's retired, this is kind of what he does now. And his information is mind-boggling, to say the least. So I want to thank you for joining me on a Wicked Planet episode, Mr. Rick.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I agree. I think we need to dive even more into this again with him when we have the time for that. Because there's still some loose ends to tie up, I think.
Oh my God. This whole case is a loose end. It's one big loose end. And this is why they want Kohberger to plead guilty, because once he pleads guilty, they can make it all disappear and nobody will have anything to look into anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's freaking crazy. All right, Rick, you want to let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Smitty Dick.
I love that. And be looking for more from Rick on our episodes of Liberty Squawks. I have a really good feeling about that show, Rick. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to get into some different stuff with it. Therese already messaged me on something else that she wants to get together with real soon, so I got to talk to you about that possibly for next week.
Okay.
All right, Rick, let's call it. Okay, everybody, you know where you can find me. You can find me also on X at Ron from NE. Just look for the Stay Chill page, which I think I'm going to be changing pretty soon. And I'm thinking, I'm definitely going to be starting a page for the studio, WP Studios, which is WP Wicked Planet Studios, which would cover Wicked Planet and Liberty Squawks. And so once that page is up and running on X, I'll let everybody know. We're also going to be doing that page for that on Instagram. I've been inching back onto Instagram, and you can find me there at a couple of places. You can find me at the Wicked Planet podcast page, and you can find me still on Run from New England page. So come and give us a follow, give Rick a follow, give the show a follow. And we have a lot of really interesting stuff lined up for Wicked Planet and Liberty Squawks. So not only do you get Wicked Planet, if you want to get into some other kind of more serious subjects, I think, less conspiratorial stuff, come and check out Liberty Squawks. I think you'll like it. But if you want to email the show, go ahead and email us at thewickedplanetpodcast@gmail.com. You got any feedback or anything like that, just let us know. Go ahead and don't forget, listeners, when you go on Spotify, you can leave comments there. I can actually review those because come to find out, my Spotify for Podcasters account is still valid. They're just not hosting the show, which that might change. We might be going back to Spotify for Podcasters. I've been seriously thinking about it because the host of our show now, I'm not liking their analytics, how they do their analytics. They're not really delivering on what they promised when I agreed to jump ship to go to them. But anyways, nobody really needs to worry about that. It'll be seamless for the show. You won't know any difference. But anyways, if there was anything else, go on Apple. Do me a favor. Nobody has left a comment on Apple Podcasts on my show in a long time. Please go there. If you like the show, give me a 4-star, 5-star. I prefer. Don't accidentally give me a 1-star and then say how much you love the show. That's not how that works. Give me a 5-star rating. Leave us a little comment. Tell us how we're doing. We really appreciate it. It helps us out with the algorithms. We're still doing really good in the rankings. And now that I've had my little mental break over the last month, and trust me, I needed it. I haven't forgot about you listeners. You listeners are very important to me, and I appreciate every single one of you. But be looking forward for more. And I promise you this time, I'm going to stay on top of it. All right, Rick Smith, thank you so much for joining me on Wicked Planet tonight. I'm going to talk to you real soon. And everybody else out there in podcast listening world, have a good night. Hope everybody's doing well. And we're going to talk to you real soon. Ron from New England, signing off.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, well, check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.